This is the very same room where one of the greediest con men in Oklahoma's history faced some tough justice. After years of scamming Oklahomans out of millions of dollars, it all ended here. You're about to get the full story. But first, let me ask you, could you really spot a con man, or for that matter, a con woman? Well, the investors in this case sure thought they could. As you watch this story, look for yourself in the victims. What would you have done in their shoes? Try and figure out what made the fraud in this case work, and what you might do differently. What you're about to learn will probably blow away any concept you have about who can con you, where they live, and exactly how they can get your hard-earned money. Pottawatomie County. Anyone who knows this part of central Oklahoma is familiar with its easy rhythm of life. With rolling hills, unbroken land, and unhurried pace, it's a snapshot of how life used to be across much of America. Cowboys still roam, even if on four-wheelers. Main streets still roll up at dusk, and the sunset is often the best show around. You'd be hard-pressed to find a more genuine bunch of hard-working, trusting people than what you would find in Pottawatomie County, which makes what happened here exceptionally disturbing. In the late 1990s, the economy was in full swing. Banks were offering increasing interest rates on CDs. But a small voice came across the airways in central Oklahoma pitching much better, more enticing promises.
Call the Hickman Agency today for your tax-free income products. Personal retirement programs, returns on your investment as high as 80%.
80% on investment? Tax-free income? The deal may have sounded too good to be true, but the assurances were coming from Bill Hickman.
Hello, I'm Bill Hickman with the Hickman Agency, home of the 80% return and the tax-free income.
Bill was a well-known insurance agent in Shawnee. He and wife Sarah, seen here in a Christmas-time TV commercial with their grandchildren, had lived in Shawnee more than 20 years. They raised their kids here.
From our family to yours, happy holidays.
The Hickmans were bona fide locals, living on some acreage just north of Shawnee and Meeker. Neighbor Regina Green, who lived across the road, says the Hickmans fit right into the community. She says they were likable and neighborly.
I met them 20 years ago when I met my husband, and we moved to this property, and we were neighbors with the Hickmans. They watched my kids after school. They babysat my youngest for the first year. In the beginning, they had an old trailer like we had, you know, very simple life, a used car. They were mortgaged like we were. I cooked out, played out in the yard. We went over and swam with them.
The Greens' friendship turned into a business relationship when Hickman offered Regina and her husband a deal of a lifetime. Bill had been dabbling in complicated viatical investments that involved selling life insurance policies of terminally ill people to third parties. Hickman suggested Regina invest money to build her daughter's college fund. This is the same daughter Bill and his wife actually babysat and called goddaughter.
He came to my house one night with a proposition where I could put some money back for my children's college education. And it was to borrow money against my life insurance and invest it into the viaticals, and told me that I would be earning 15% interest. And I figured I could trust this man because they'd raised my kids with me.
In today's volatile stock market, where you could lose all of your investment income, you need a place to go that will give you safety in investment, safety in return, as well as guidance through these times. Call us today for your safe investment. Call us today for 80% returns. Call us today.
It wasn't the 80% return promised in Bill's commercials, but Regina made her investment with the Hickman Agency based on her confidence in Bill. And as Bill promised, interest payments began appearing on Regina's bank statements. When Regina's parents heard about the deal, they invested their savings. They too began receiving interest payments, just as Bill had promised. News of this investment opportunity spread like wildfire across Pottawatomie County, attracting investors in Oklahoma City, the Tulsa area, and as far away as California. Meanwhile, the Hickmans' lifestyle jumped up a notch, then another, then another.
They started driving a Mercedes. Then they brought in the new mobile home, the double-wide trailer, and I remember going over to look at it one day, and Bill was telling me that they'd paid like $95,000 for this trailer house. And I'm like, oh my God, why would you pay that much? Why didn't you just build a permanent house? And he said, well, when Sarah gets tired of it, I'll just buy her a new one.
Two of Bill and Sarah's children added their homes to the family's 40-acre compound. The Hickmans acquired boats, including houseboats, for everyone in their family to enjoy. There were luxury cars, a Hummer, and every year Bill took his employees, mostly family members, on a luxury trip to Las Vegas. First class, of course. Also, the Hickmans' business stationery indicated they had opened an office in Chicago. This was all very impressive to folks like Bertie Morris. Now Bertie is 97 years old, legally blind, widowed, and pretty much on her own. All of her 3 children have predeceased her in different tragic circumstances. Fortunately, Bertie had some money left behind by her late husband. He earned it working long hours in the oil fields of Panama, Venezuela, and Africa. That's Bertie, living with her husband and daughter in the jungle. All of those years of saving, all of that money was tucked safely away in an Oklahoma City bank. By 1999, there was about $160,000 left. Bertie planned on leaving that money to her grandchildren when she died. But her bank was only paying 2% interest. The stock market was performing at an all-time low. Then, a relative told Bertie about Bill Hickman's TV offer of much higher returns.
Call today for your personal retirement program. Tax-free income, as much as 65% return on your funds.
Bertie was very interested. She wanted to make more money to leave her grandchildren. So a relative took Bertie to meet with the infamous Bill Hickman.
Well, hello, Bertie. How are you today?
We went up to his office and I gave him a check for $160,000.
It's a long way down, so be careful. Be careful. Oh, there you go.
Oh, he was a real nice fella, friendly.
Hi, Bertie. I'm Bill Hickman. It's a pleasure to meet you.
I met his wife. She was a nice person too, and he'd tell me that everything was fine.
Bill presented a security in the form of an investment contract guaranteeing that Bertie would receive 15% annual interest, and the funds were protected. Also, that Bertie could withdraw funds, being interest or principal, either monthly or annually, at her discretion. What a deal. Of course, it wasn't the extra high returns Bill had promised in his TV commercials, but he had Bertie hooked anyway because of her mistaken trust in him. And like with everyone else, Bill made good on his promise. For the next 3 years, he paid Bertie $1,200 a month on time. It was just a deal that did seem too good to be true. By 2003, the Hickman Agency had collected millions of dollars from unsuspecting investors, and Bill's son, Bill Hickman Jr., was getting into the family business. He made deals while Dad went on Las Vegas gambling sprees and on long weekends to Lake Eufaula. At one popular boaters hangout, Bill Sr. was notorious for picking up everyone's tab.
Can I get you another round?
Sure, that'd be wonderful.
Thanks. Can I get another round?
As usual, Bill.
Bill's longtime friends, many of them investors, curiously watched this increasingly lavish lifestyle from the sidelines.
No, he was having a ball. He was having a lot of fun. Always going to Las Vegas on vacations in Canada and Chicago and places like that, New Mexico.
And they stayed the same for a couple years. And then probably in the last 2 years, Sarah was getting snobby with me. And I noticed a change with the way they treated Jessica, the one that they babysat for so long.
What was especially odd about the Hickmans was that for such a lucrative business, there wasn't much activity going on at their Shawnee office. Their landlady says the Hickmans were nice people, but something just wasn't right.
Anybody that's in insurance business does not make enough money to live like they lived. Drove really nice cars, the whole family worked here, they never did any work. Desks were clean, nothing on desk, so they didn't work.
The landlady thought the Hickmans were laundering money, and she wasn't far off. In late 2003, there was one potential Hickman investor who just could not buy into the idea that he could get such a high return on his investment. So he called the Oklahoma Securities Commission. This is the branch of state government that investigates potentially shady securities investment deals. Agency attorney Patty LaBarth took the call.
He was retiring from Tinker Air Force Base, and he was told by a man that he had worked with about how wonderful this other man's investment of his retirement funds with the Hickman Agency was for he and his wife, and the return that they were going to be earning from the investment of their retirement funds. So this gentleman had gone to visit with Bill Hickman Sr., and he was calling our office after the meeting to say, you know, is this a legitimate deal? Are these people okay?
Patty asked the man if he had any documents that she could review.
Okay. Did he give you any documentation about the investment?
He said no. Bill Hickman wouldn't allow the documents to leave the office. That was a red flag, and the Securities Commission began investigating Mr. Hickman Sr.
We issued a subpoena to him to provide us with information about the investment products that he was offering. Some time went by. They needed an extension of time. We finally received the documents from Mr. Hickman, and they were wholly inadequate. I mean, the documents that he sent to us were not responsive to what I had asked him for. So that worried me. So at that point, we decided we would subpoena bank records.
In the search for Hickman's records, all banks in Shawnee were subpoenaed. Finally, Hickman's account was discovered, and what Patty found was shocking.
When I got those bank records, though, I did sit down and start going through, and I started, writing down names and addresses and phone numbers of some of the people who were submitting large amounts of money to Mr. Hickman. But what alarmed me in going through those records was that there didn't seem to be any corresponding investment activity. I couldn't see that Mr. Hickman was taking any of the money and doing anything with it in the nature of some kind of an investment that would be generating the return he had promised to them. All I could see that the money was going out for was personal expense, and then to repay early investors a little bit of interest each month.
So, money was coming in for investments, but nothing was going out for investments. It was a classic Ponzi scheme. Most securities fraud cases involve some sort of Ponzi scheme. The Ponzi scenario revolves around one entity. In this case, it was the Hickman Agency. Bill Hickman would take money from investors and promise them big, quick returns. He would then get the money to pay for those returns from new investors. In essence, Hickman was robbing Peter to pay Paul. New money would come in, some of it would pay old investors. The rest funded the Hickman family's ritzy lifestyle.
Expenses that we saw going out of the account were in the nature of jewelry. There was a significant amount of jewelry. There were boats, all kinds of boats, houseboats, Sea-Doo, ski boats. There were vehicles. There were home renovations. There were all kinds of Segways and tanning beds and Las Vegas trips and expenses. There was just all kinds of personal living expenses. All of the Hickman children and extended family, spouses and even parents of spouses were getting significant amounts of money paid out of that account. All of the kids were being paid salaries whether they worked or not.
But Bill Hickman's scam was destined for failure. By late 2003, he had to find $300,000 every month to pay off earlier investors and cover his bills. But new victims were easy to find. Widows, elderly, and retired people were writing bill checks for $200,000, $300,000, $400,000. Investors thought they had hit a secret gold mine. At the Oklahoma Securities Commission, Patty's boss, Irving Faught, knew they had to move fast to shut the Hickmans down.
We thought that this situation deserved immediate attention in the sense of filing a civil action and getting a receiver appointed to marshal those assets before they were all gone, since they weren't going into investments. So we filed a civil action alleging securities law violations and appointing a receiver over the property that was left, that was in the hands of the Hickmans.
3 days before Christmas 2003, the Hickmans got a holiday surprise. Court-appointed receiver Steve Moriarty and an assistant arrived at the family's 40-acre compound to begin the process of seizing property. This was the video they shot.
It's December 22nd, This is the home of William Hickman Sr. Mr. Hickman and his son just left. Swimming pool, hot tub, one of the four-wheelers.
We found a number of firearms, particularly at Bill Jr.'s house. Probably the most important thing that we found at Bill Sr.'s house was a safe wherein a large number of items of personal jewelry were in storage. The safe was approximately 4 to 5 feet high, 2 feet across, 2 to 3 feet deep, and was packed to the gills with items of jewelry. I think all told, there were about 300 to 350 individual items of jewelry that were contained in the safe.
When news of the Hickman case broke, 160 terrified investors surfaced. Most of them were retirees who invested their life savings with the Hickmans. Records show Bill scammed them out of at least $8 million. A criminal case began, spearheaded by Pottawatomie County District Attorney Richard Smotherman. Smotherman immediately requested an arrest warrant, then dispatched sheriff's deputies to apprehend Bill Sr.
We were out looking for him. We had my investigators on the ground waiting for the minute the warrant got signed because I wanted him in custody, if nothing else, to show the victims that we were doing something and that they could trust us, rely on us, help us in the investigation. It was important to me that they knew we were serious about it, which is why he was arrested almost immediately after the warrant was signed. They went out to his house and he was taken into custody without incident. He went from a lifestyle of complete wealth and opulence to a lifestyle of an orange jumpsuit and really bad food. If I were there, I'd be sleeping with my back to the wall, so I'm sure it was quite a shock for him.
Bill Hickman Sr. was charged with more than 400 felony counts of obtaining money by false pretenses. And the feds wanted him too, for money laundering, mail fraud, and wire fraud. Bill Hickman Jr. was also arrested and faced federal charges.
In federal court today, Mr. Hickman Sr. pled guilty to money laundering by laundering proceeds of a securities fraud. Mr. Hickman Jr. pled guilty to conspiracy to commit securities fraud. Well, obviously, this is incredibly significant, an $8 million loss and 160 victims. Investor fraud like this is a very serious crime, and it will have very serious consequences for these defendants, and that's appropriate. There's a lot of people who've lost a lot of dreams because of this crime.
In state court, Bill Sr. also pled guilty to obtaining money by false pretenses, but made a plea arrangement in exchange for leniency for his son and wife, Sarah. In all, Bill would be sentenced to 150 years in prison, a life sentence.
Mr. Hickman, one further thing that I will say to you. Your particular offense and your admission to pleading guilty stole not only money from these victims, but stole a sense of security that will never be brought back to them. For this, I hope you are never released from custody.
Bill Jr. would face 5 years for conspiracy. Sarah Hickman escaped jail time, but she and her adult daughters were ordered to pay $8.5 million in restitution to victims. But the victims wondered if they would ever see a dime. In the fallout of the Hickman Agency scam, the Oklahoma Securities Commission got a court order for all Hickman assets to be sold at auction. 120. It was the one way the state could help victims get some money back.
I will take personal checks today.
You bet, boys, and let's go. How many dollars? $4,500, $4,000, and let's go.
What we have today is an auction of the vehicles, the remaining vehicles from the Hickman family members. We've got two large motorhomes, one 35-foot, one 36-foot. We've got a Ford Bronco, a Nissan pickup truck, and what they call a rock climber Jeep. That Bill Jr. was in the process of refurbishing to show in some of these classic car shows. The family maintained 2 houseboats, 3 ski boats, and some jet ski equipment over there.
Would you give me a $1,700 bill for it? I sold it here for $1,650.
By far the biggest sale that we had was we auctioned off the contents of the residences, and we sold off everything that there was to sell off, including walkways and shrubs and everything.
Stony-faced buyers showed up at several auctions. Most of them were curious onlookers. Some of them were Hickman victims, like Mike DeGraffenreid.
And we just came to see what our money had bought and what we were going to get out of it, get back.
In reality, victims would only receive about 10 cents for every dollar lost. Many families were wiped out. Retirees who had given their life savings to Hickman had to go back to work, if they could find work. Houses were sold or remortgaged. Victims sold off their possessions just to pay the bills. And there was the struggle with shame, the depression, bitterness, and the loss of trust.
Honey, I hate to say this, and I hope the Lord will forgive me. I don't trust anybody anymore.
I'm not going to trust anybody anymore. You know, that's the bad part about it.
But I know a lot of people that their day-to-day lives have affected. A lot of friends that I grew up with, or I should say my parents' friends, have had to go back to work. They're retired. And they've had to go back to work just to live every day, normal lives, so that they could drive a Hummer, have a $100,000 trailer house and diamonds, you know. And we never suspected a thing, because you build on a trust, a family trust, and when they talk like their family, you feel that. And it, like I said, I've known them 20 years, and I trusted them to babysit my children, my most precious thing. So why wouldn't I trust them with my children's education? And it's gone.
Bill Hickman Sr. was put behind bars for life, but there are plenty of other con men and women out there today who are doing everything they can to gain your confidence and get to your money. Unfortunately, even stockbrokers get taken by clever scam artists, so you need to arm yourself with some information that can keep you from getting conned. Here are the facts. First, securities fraud defined is robbery and theft involving transactions in securities. When investors are conned out of their money based on lies and half-truths, it's securities fraud, and it's illegal. Now, how do you spot and stop a con? The first step is to realize that the con artist is like a chameleon. He or she may blend into the community. They often appear successful, rich, involved in the community, even in your local church. This is how con artists gain your trust. They fit into your community, just like Bill Hickman, and they try to meet your expectations of what a trustworthy person is. Now, this isn't to say you should lose trust in everybody around you. Just be trusting with your eyes wide open to better safeguard your money. Step 2, know that a con artist's words or expressions can give him or her away. Be wary of promises like free gift, tax-free, free vacation. You get the idea. Step 3, watch out for salespeople who talk down to you, who want you to think they're smarter than you. Step 4, don't invest in anything you don't understand. This is a big one. The con man loves to make you feel dumb. Step 5, and this is key, beware of anyone promising big payoffs. You have to ask yourself, why are they offering this deal to me? The old adage is still valid. If a deal sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Now, there are very good investment opportunities out there. They're just rare. But if you think you found one, here's step 6. Ask hard questions. And when you do, don't let any seller intimidate you. Con artists love to do that. Here are some of the hard questions to ask. How much of your money is being invested? How much profit is the seller making? What success has the seller had in the past? Who are some of the people who have invested? What are their names and numbers? And did they make any money? What is the seller's business history? Oftentimes, the con artist cannot give you any historical important facts because there aren't any. If the seller can't answer these questions, the deal's not worth your money. Step 7, never invest in a hurry. One of the favorite tools of the con artist is to rush you, not give you time to think. Any good deal is still going to be there tomorrow. Step 8, research investment offers for compliance with state securities laws. In Oklahoma, check with the Oklahoma Securities Commission. They can tell you if a seller is a licensed securities professional, if the seller has a history of securities fraud, or if the securities or investment he or she is selling is registered. We'll tell you how to reach the Oklahoma Securities Commission at the end of this show. Other great sources you should check with before buying a product or making an investment are the Consumer Protection Division of the State Attorney General's Office and the National Association of Securities Dealers. So, let's ask the question. Could our tips have protected the Hickman investors? I'll let victim Regina Green answer that. She says she learned some things from being scammed by the Hickmans.
The one thing that I did learn that I would have never had a clue to do would be to contact the Securities Commission. Make the one phone call or the one email or the one letter. You can wait 2 weeks before you invest that money. Because if the deal is there today, it will be there in 2 weeks if they're legit. Check it out.
Investors like Regina Green learned a hard lesson. But what lesson has Bill Hickman learned? Was his crime worth it? Well, his family's destroyed and they lost everything. Last I heard, Sarah was back living with her parents. And Bill, well, he's going to prison for the rest of his life. The message all of the local, state, and federal agencies involved in this case want to send is this. They will not tolerate scam artists operating in Oklahoma. If you try to pull a scam, they will pursue you and prosecute you to the full power of the law.
Had an old trailer like we had, you know, very simple life, a used car. They were mortgaged like we were. I cooked out, played out in the yard. We went over and swam with them.
The Greens' friendship turned into a business relationship when Hickman offered Regina and her husband a deal of a lifetime. Bill had been dabbling in complicated viatical investments that involved selling life insurance policies of terminally ill people to third parties. Hickman suggested Regina invest money to build her daughter's college fund. This is the same daughter Bill and his wife actually babysat and called goddaughter.
He came to my house one night with a proposition where I could put some money back for my children's college education. And it was to borrow money against my life insurance and invest it into the viaticals, and told me that I would be earning 15% interest.
Oklahoma is familiar with its easy rhythm of life. With rolling hills, unbroken land, and unhurried pace, it's a snapshot of how life used to be across much of America. Cowboys still roam, even if on four-wheelers. Main streets still roll up at dusk, and the sunset is often the best show around. You'd be hard-pressed to find a more genuine bunch of hard-working, trusting people than what you would find in Pottawatomie County, which makes what happened here exceptionally disturbing. In the late 1990s, the economy was in full swing. Banks were offering increasing interest rates on CDs. But a small voice came across the airways in central Oklahoma pitching much better, more enticing promises.
Call the Hickman Agency today for your tax-free income products. Personal retirement programs, returns on your investment as high as 80%.
80% on investment?
And I figured I could trust this man because they'd raised my kids with me.
In today's volatile stock market, where you could lose all of your investment income, you need a place to go that will give you safety in investment, safety in return, as well as guidance through these times. Call us today for your safe investment. Call us today for 80% returns. Call us today.
It wasn't the 80% return promised in Bill's commercials, but Regina made her investment with the Hickman Agency based on her confidence in Bill. And as Bill promised, interest payments began appearing on Regina's bank statements. When Regina's parents heard about the deal, they invested their savings. They too began receiving interest payments, just as Bill had promised. News of this investment opportunity spread like wildfire across Pottawatomie County, attracting investors in Oklahoma City, the Tulsa area, and as far away as California. Meanwhile, the Hickman's life. This is the very same room where one of the greediest con men in Oklahoma's history faced some tough justice. After years of scamming Oklahomans out of millions of dollars, it all ended here. You're about to get the full story. But first, let me ask you, could you really spot a con man, or for that matter, a con woman? Well, the investors in this case sure thought they could. As you watch this story, look for yourself in the victims. What would you have done in their shoes? Try and figure out what made the fraud in this case work and what you might do differently. What you're about to learn will probably blow away any concept you have about who can con you, where they live, and exactly how they can get your hard-earned money. Pottawatomie County. Anyone who knows this part of Central tax-free income, the deal may have sounded too good to be true, but the assurances were coming from Bill Hickman.
Hello, I'm Bill Hickman with the Hickman Agency, home of the 80% return and the tax-free income.
Bill was a well-known insurance agent in Shawnee. He and wife Sarah, seen here in a Christmas-time TV commercial with their grandchildren, had lived in Shawnee more than 20 years. They raised their kids here.
From our family to yours, happy holidays.
The Hickmans were bona fide locals, living on some acreage just north of Shawnee and Meeker. Neighbor Regina Green, who lived across the road, says the Hickmans fit right into the community. She says they were likable and neighborly.
I met them 20 years ago when I met my husband, and we moved to this property, and we were neighbors with the Hickmans. They watched my kids after school. They babysat my youngest for the first year. In the beginning, they